Hello, I'm Nick from the UBC Students for Freedom of Expression. Today we are joined by Mark Hecht, instructor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, and former professor Dr. Ricardo Duchesne formerly from the University of New Brunswick. Today we are going to be talking about how their points of view on immigration and cultural compatibility have been treated within academic circles, within journalistic circles, and generally how these ideas are treated within our society. So first, I'd like to start off with an open discussion about your circumstances and how we are living in a society where the freedom to express ideas and even within academia are being curtailed by a general atmosphere of hostility.
I'll answer that. It is really amazing that universities, which continuously claim that they're places where critical thinking flourishes, that academics and administrators included will not allow an open discussion about what really is the most transformative force of our times, which is mass immigration, and whether diversity benefits the West or not. They simply have become, all universities, places in which it is now the official mission of the university to promote this ideology. It is reaching a point in which that becomes a criteria for hiring. I have seen this in some universities that they will use that as a criteria, whether this person has supported diversity, inclusiveness, and tolerance, and that can be part of your CV, of your career. It can strengthen your application. So this is where we are at now. I would say that this whole phrase, critical thinking, is the most Orwellian phrase that imaginable, because it says that all questions are open for discussion and for debate, and that universities are places in which students are encouraged to look at many angles, many possibilities, many books and ideas. But when it comes to the issue of immigration, and the same is true for gender issues and many other issues, but since we're talking about immigration, when it comes to that issue, there is no critical thinking whatsoever. They assume that the fact that you criticize the races and you criticize people who are not inclusive by their standards, that itself is critical thinking. Or they assume that if you go against banks or big corporations, that's a form of critical thinking. I don't know if they are willfully ignorant or not, but it seems to me that banks, TD, RBC, all of them are totally in line with the issue of diversity. And they love the ideas of academics. They love what academics are saying about transsexuals, about race mixing, about white being throughout history the most racist group, and so on. So there is no major difference on the question of immigration and diversity between your biggest corporations, Costco, Toys R Us, Starbucks, you name it. They are completely in line with what the academics are saying. And so it just is amazing. And it really bothers me because what they're doing to students is damaging their capacity to think. Turning them into clones who just repeat in a blinded way what these pampered, somewhat lazy academics say, academics who really themselves don't engage in self-examination. When you look at the phrase critical thinking, it has roots. It has roots in Europe. I would say you can go back to Kant, but I'm not going to get into Immanuel Kant right now. He wrote books, all of which had the word critique, and Karl Marx followed, using the word critique in a number of his works. And then, even in the case of Marx, it was real critical thinking. It meant that you examined the assumptions that you come along with when you discuss or write about an issue. Well, academics today don't examine the fundamental assumption behind diversity, which is that diversity somehow automatically and inherently improves wherever it goes. Wherever you have open borders, they take it as a given, an unexamined assumption that it will improve that nation. They don't allow the possibility that actually may not improve it. And beyond that, they don't even ask themselves, why is it that across the West, they're promoting this ideology? Where did that come from? They're simply born into it. These academics, they're born into the dominance of this ideology, and they don't think about it. And they go, wow, I'm a critical thinker, I support diversity. No, you're not. You're just a brainwashed clone who just repeats what the banks say.
So, Mark, tell me a little bit about how your story is a bit different from that.
Well, I think Ricardo has covered a number of things there, but I think if we go just to the basic foundations, the understanding is that democracy is all about freedom of speech, and that's critical for the foundation of democracy itself. And of course, universities are supposed to be the bastions of freedom of speech. But once you start getting too extreme on either the left or the left for sure right now, you have suppression, whether it's intentional or not. And I just want to relate an email I got from a student recently, right after the entire Vancouver Sun op-ed controversy hit. I talked with the first class that I had right after that, and we talked openly about what I had said and some of the things that I needed to clarify and the lessons I had learned. And I got an email from him later on, and he said, "Thank you, that is the first time in 3 years at Mount Royal University where a prof has actually had the guts to say openly what he thinks and be open to criticism from his students in the class." And so yeah, he thanked me for not feeling suppressed within the classroom.
Right, so is that something typical, to feel repressed within your own classroom when you have students who disagree with you?
Apparently it is. It was a bit of a shock to me, but apparently that is quite normal in classrooms in universities across the country.
Yeah, I mean, students over the years have come to me and said that I raised this issue in class. One of the issues that you have discussed in class, I raised it in another class in a more moderate, low-key way, and I would get these looks from the professor, or I would get the impression that that would not be acceptable in this class. One of the reasons I survived for a long time in universities is that I do believe in the idea of open discussions. I never expected students to agree with me. I have a forceful set of views. I don't hide them. I would tell them openly right from the opening classes. I would say I don't agree with multiculturalism and I'm against mass immigration. They were like, my God, how could that be? But I will let them know. But if you're for it, if you really like it, don't hesitate to find reasons why I'm wrong and bring them up. And they sense that I wasn't just talking just to talk. But unfortunately, academic professors today in the arts faculty, less so when you're dealing with specialized subjects. If some professor is dealing with the Reformation or the Renaissance, it's not that political. But when you're dealing with things that are more contemporary, you do have a situation, a climate in which these academics are ideologues that push an agenda onto their students. We are all ideologues, but there is a difference between an ideologue who says, I do believe in real substantive critical thinking and open dialogue, and an ideologue who says, no, those issues have been settled, and you need to accept what I'm saying. And this is what they're doing on many issues, not just immigration.
So let's focus on that idea of academic mobbing. I kind of want both of you to go through how you have experienced it in the recent fallout of, we'll get into the news articles later, but how have faculties your faculty and other professors within your university mobbed you in effect?
My experience is that on the surface, Mount Royal University has been very publicly in favor of the principles of freedom of expression. In private, however, there's certainly a number of professors at Mount Royal University on the left who have apparently written a letter, and I don't know what's in the letter itself. All I know is that there is some sort of letter, a number of people have signed it, and asked for the provost to essentially bar me from the university. I can't go into the details because I don't know the details. I've only heard this in a roundabout way. But then there's also a closed Facebook group where it's quite common for them to, a few professors in particular, to essentially call me names and yet never quite get to any substantive arguments against what I've said. So that's how I'd say I've been mobbed in a weird sort of way.
That's an interesting thing, having professors act almost as radically as some of the students might act. They might have their own little closed Facebook groups where they talk smack about other faculty. That's a interesting. We all, students.
They're very good at name calling.
Students typically have like this notion that professors are somewhat above them in terms of most of this drama But it's interesting to, from my work with some professors, it seems to be paralleled almost in the exact same way.
Yes. Oh, yeah, for sure. In my case, there is an expert on workplace mobbing. His name is Kenneth Westhuse, and he wrote an article about my case. And even though at that point I had not communicated with him, he studied my case, and in just a matter of a few days, he came to the conclusion that what I experienced was an academic mobbing. And the reason he said that is that in my case, it was not a situation in which the administration began to put pressure on me, but rather that academics, my colleagues, among themselves, organized a mobbing, a way to get the administration to suppress me, and spreading rumors among themselves and trying to discredit me as much as possible, discredit my scholarship, because this is a key element of the left on the issue again of immigration, that any criticism in their view cannot possibly be scholarly, but it's rather the view of a bigoted person who is not that educated. So when they see me writing this book, Canada in Decay, they have immediately to say, well, that can't possibly be a scholarly book. And they will say, first, it's a small publisher. Secondly, they go to what books this publisher has published and try and find ways to discredit it without any of them, none of them, read the book and challenge a single statement I made. So that's their strategy. I have this other book, by the way, which they cannot possibly claim is not academic. It has over 800 different books and articles in the bibliography that were actually cited at one point or another. So I don't just list them. But they haven't even read that either. But in any case, academic mobbing is a phenomenon. And Westhuse wrote that article more recently in The Economist, which is a globalist magazine. And a guy whose name just escapes me from England, who also experienced a mobbing, listed 10 names, 12 names of people who have been mobbed in just the last few years. And he listed my name. He also put Jordan Peterson. I don't think Jordan Peterson has ever experienced an academic mobbing, but he has experienced tensions and issues at U of T. But yes, I mean, we're dealing in many ways with academics that have a childlike mentality. And I know some people will say, come on, like, it's just a matter of they having a different viewpoint. And this is a long topic, but I do believe that what we are seeing in academia today are a bunch of academics who have the minds of 12-year-olds, just like Justin Trudeau. I mean, he has a mind like that. And I think the fact that we have so many females in our universities, many of whom were hired through affirmative action, has created a situation that has intensified this kind of 12-year-old mentality. Because many of these women, and I'm not saying that that is inherent to them, I'm not saying that they're not some excellent female scholars, but many of them, it's almost automatic. If they get into the arts faculty, they are almost automatically feminist. And feminism is not a substantive field of research that nourishes through scholarship. A lot of it is emotionalism, a lot of women venting, and yes, they cite here and they cite there. But it's, in my view, it's not real scholarship or substantive because, first of all, what big thinkers can you find behind feminism? Not many. Simone de Beauvoir, I would say, was a very good intellectual, but there are not that many beyond that. So I think this feminism and the emotionalism that comes along with it has been a factor in creating an atmosphere in which you can just say, oh, that upsets me. Oh, you have just made me feel bad. How dare you say that? And that in itself constitutes an argument. And the men are terrified of these women because, as I said, in the Faculty of Arts, practically every woman that gets in there is a feminist. They've been influenced by it. And the men, I have seen this. You can try with a male and start saying a few things against feminism, and the guy's going to look sideways to see if there is no woman looking around and criticizing him. So to me, before, even among Marxists, leftists, there was still a spirit of debate. I was actually educated by many Marxists, but they used to be more solid, more real. They understood there is this viewpoint, and they were eager to engage you and prove you wrong and argue with you. I had Marxists like that, but now you don't have that. You have people that get upset, that get angry, that say things against you that are more personal, emotional, and so on. So yes, there is an atmosphere that has nurtured this mobbing mentality.
Let's move on to how you two have been treated by the press. So even outside of the academy, you have journalists being involved in these academic mobbings. Mark, you are much more familiar with this topic because it is almost exclusively journalists who went after you in the press.
Yeah, first of all, I have to say that I think I've lost my naivety around Canada's media at this point. The media, I would say, used to have a lot of resources to do in-depth journalism, and I think it's just part of our society at this point where, in fact, many journalists really do have time constraints on them that they haven't had before in the past, and I think that's only part of the explanation of why I think journalistic integrity has gone down. And that's particularly true of, I would say, left-wing journalism. And so I actually had a reporter, Jonathan Goldsby from Canada Land Show, who phoned me up, I think the day after this whole event went down. And he managed to twist what I was saying and focus his own agenda on this idea that I was inspired by one particular person at the Vancouver Sun to write my article and submit it to the Vancouver Sun, which of course is completely false. But then other magazines, some pretty low-grade ones like the Georgia Straight, picked it up straight from Canada Lands and took their own take on it, but essentially reiterated the same false narratives that Canada Land Show had done. Like, they said I was anti-immigrant. I'm not sure where they got that from, but yeah, it's been interesting to see the false narratives that are particularly strong on the left. And I used to be a real fan of CBC, but I think CBC has really gone down in terms of its quality, especially over the last 10 years. And now I've seen it directly affect me.
So yes, Ricardo, let's talk about how you were treated in the media. There was a Huffington Post article where they referred to you as a white supremacist. Tell us a little bit about how you
Well, I
were
would say
treated in the media
generally that
following
I have
that
noticed there are two ways that they have gone about handling the ideas that I express. The Huffington Post is the most common one and it's quite obvious, and that is to use the words labels they can use against you and then act as if that in itself constitutes an argument. You can be sure that the author, I don't even remember the name of that clown, the author of this hit piece in the HuffPost, he has never read a book I have written. He has never read one of the scholarly articles I have written, and you can find them in ResearchGate. I have over 50 articles there. And what he has done is that he has gone through some of the blog articles in the Council of European Canadians. I have 140 articles there. He went over some of them and tried to find phrases, statements that sounded bad. He cited them without actually offering a link. And then he said, here it is. This guy is a supremacist, he's a racist, blah, blah, blah. That's all there is to him. And then he kind of acted as if I am secretly doing this in the middle of the night, joining white nationalist groups and writing to white nationalist websites when it is not true. I openly write for the blog. People have known this. In many ways, I troll academics for a long time. I troll the former place where I worked for a long time openly. I had a great time, and this bothered them. And so that's the first strategy: label you, and just that's it. The second one is just ignore what you do. Like this book, for example. Initially, there was some interest on the part of CBC. Walrus Magazine, one of the writers for Walrus Magazine gave me a 1 hour, 20-minute interview. The article was never published because the higher-ups eventually said, I think, this guy sounds too reasonable, he's developing his arguments, we cannot label him. There was no way that they could take a statement from that interview and say this is what he is, so they decided not to publish it. I had about 3 interviews from various CBC radio locations from Montreal, Toronto, and again, it was odd. And I asked about it, and they just didn't publish them. So I realized there was that other strategy. Just pretend the person doesn't exist. Don't say a word about it. Don't review the book at all. Even though, just because it was doing well, and I mean, it's been a bestseller since it was released. It has sold a lot of copies, and you can see that it has a lot of customer reviews. So those are the 2 strategies I would say. Demonize you or ignore you, but never deal with the arguments, because as I said before, the left has to create this mindset among their students that this person could not possibly have a good intellectually based argument based on research. My arguments, even the most polemical ones, I think I can say without being immodest, are very well researched. I look for statistics and all of that. So that's what I say about the journalists.
I can attest to one instance where, when we brought you last year, I had an exchange with Yabisi, the school paper's reporter, who did admit that it was, in fact, policy not to mention your name specifically for the purpose of not giving you attention.
Yeah.
So even though, like, and I think a lot of people will agree, your event with us last year was possibly one of the most controversial ever to happen in UBC history, it was purposely neglected for the sake of not giving you attention.
Yes, they're afraid that the students will hear a sound, reasonable argument. They're terrified at that. You can be sure there's not a person there in UBC that has said anything against me that would debate me. They do it behind the scenes. They do it to their students. They act tough in front of their students, like they know a lot and this and that. When the truth is that most university professors outside their narrow leader field are incredibly ignorant. They barely read. And I could go on. They spend their summers just lazing around. So I don't really respect these people. I respect there are some scholars in universities that are excellent, and I rely on their works. But these guys tend to be less political. They're dealing with subjects, that don't lend themselves immediately to politics, and there you find incredible scholars. But those in gender, in sociology, in women's studies, in critical race theory, I mean, these guys are a disaster.
The last question that I'll ask you is, in your personal opinion, based on your experience with the atmosphere, what do you think would be the best way to change the existing atmosphere of academia, and even broadly? Because it just seems that these sorts of situations are growing. You have academic mobbings. You have a certain behavior linked to journalism. All of these things together have formed the basis behind the damage to both of your reputations. What is the best way to, turn down this craziness effectively?
Actually,
Well, I think attacking freedom of speech is not new to our time or our society. It's something that we've always had to face. Perhaps less so in Western democracy over the past couple hundred years, but other societies, people fight and die for freedom of speech. And I think only now we're starting to get to this point in our society where we really do have a challenge. I don't actually know what the solutions are to it, but standing up for freedom of speech constantly is not something we can ever let go of. It'll happen continuously.
I would add to that, and I think I would also emphasize freedom of speech. And I would add that universities are beyond redemption at this point. However, if there is an agent that can create some sort of controversy for there to be a challenge to the university, it has to be students. It has to be guys like you who move along the freedom of speech line. And one of the reasons why I come to these talks, and I'm traveling all the way from New Brunswick, it's not easy. And last year some people would say, well, Ricardo, why would you travel just because some students invited you? That's not legitimate scholarly organization, this and that. Well, I believe that students are now in our universities the only agents of critical thinking. Professors are not. And so it is coming possibly from them. And I'm really impressed that in UBC there are 2 freedom of speech groups, and that's where it is coming from. And I would take an invitation from students anytime than from anybody else if they ever invited me. And if they did, it's just to set up a trap or something like that. I mean, they just wouldn't invite me. So I think it is great that the students are doing this, and I respect the students that do this more than all those academics in our universities who shouldn't even be there.
Well, that was a fantastic interview. We thank you for spending the time with us. Stay tuned for more interviews, and please come to the Mark Hecht and Ricardo Duchesne talk tomorrow. Tickets are still available. If you enjoyed this video, please consider sharing and subscribing it. We really appreciate any support that we get, and we're trying to get the message out there. Thank you.